And with that, would love to jump into the program. I myself am a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and I know that we have a responsibility to keep these stories alive because it ensures that the torch of Holocaust remembrance is lit and shines brightly as we pass on their stories to the next generation. I've been involved in so many Holocaust education programs, including March of the Living and March of Remembrance and Hope, both as a volunteer chaperone and a professional. And these experiences gave me the foundation to explore my family's history and to support those around me in finding and using their voices. Now I work outside of the Jewish community, and I strive every day to carry this torch and bring my colleagues these invaluable lessons of humanity. Today's panel features two 3Gs who are using their voice in unique ways to be allies and activists in an online era, Stephanie Butnick and Shai DeLuca. With that, I'm also excited to introduce to you our moderator for the day, who is our co-chair of this event and a community leader and ally in her own right, Jaime Reich. Excited to pass the mic over to Jaime.
Thank you, and I'm so honored and excited to be moderating this event, and I'm excited to introduce our guest speakers for the day. So Stephanie Butnick and Shai DeLuca. Stephanie Butnick is the deputy editor of Tablet magazine and has written for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. She is also the co-host of popular Jewish podcast Unorthodox and host of the Museum of Jewish Heritage series, Generally Speaking with Stephanie Butnick, exploring the questions of 3Gs and genetically transmitted trauma. She has a bachelor's degree in religion from Duke and a master's in religious studies from NYU, and she lives in New York with her husband and their cat, Cat Stevens. Our other special guest, Shai DeLuca, is the founder and president of the award-winning design studio Shai DeLuca Interior Design and design expert for Canada's #1 lifestyle show, CityLine. Shai is active in the global interior design community as well as the Holocaust education and Israel advocacy space. And I don't know the name of your dog, but I'm very excited that your dog has joined us.
Sheena. This is Sheena.
And so thrilled to have both of you with us today for this this Fireside, Menorah side chat about how being the grandchild of Holocaust survivors influences who we are, what we do, and how we live. So welcome, Stephanie and Shai.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. We're going to start off with a moderated conversation, and then we'll have time for audience Q&A. So please put your questions in the chat, and we will try and get to them. But I just want to start off with tell us, if you can each tell us a bit about yourself, like give us your elevator pitch.
Stephanie, I'll let you go first.
Okay, great. I first have to say, it's so nice to not be interviewing anyone. Shai, do you agree? Like to have someone ask me questions, I'm like, great.
I know. I don't know. I'm sitting here and I'm just like, bring it on.
You're welcome.
Nice.
So I'm Stephanie Butnick. I am in New York, but I'm pretending I'm in Toronto with this event, which I appreciate. I am the deputy editor of Tablet magazine, which is an online news and culture publication for a Jewish audience, but also with a lot of non-Jewish readers. And I co-host Unorthodox, which we like to brag is the universe's leading Jewish podcast, because no one has stopped us yet from saying that. I like to say it's like the #1 podcast according to iTunes and God. Again, no pushback yet. So, you know, on the show, we interview all sorts of people and we talk about news of the Jews, and we basically just bring Jewish life, Jewish lived experience to people more broadly. And as you mentioned in my bio, I've recently started hosting a speaker series with the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, where I basically interview grandchildren of Holocaust survivors just to see, because those are to me the most fascinating conversations to have, right? You know right away when you're talking to someone who has such a sort of, even if their experience and their family is completely different, or their family's experience is completely different, you sort of connect right away on a lot of different levels. So that's, I don't know, I haven't been in an elevator in a really long time, so has the elevator ended yet? That's sort of that's me.
I love that. That's great. So I guess I'll just do me then now. My name is Shai DeLuca, and I am an Israeli Canadian. I live in Toronto right now. Great city, by the way, a little cold up here, but I'm sure it's the same in New York. You said it's raining there, it's raining here. So, you know, I like to say that we're on par. In terms of what I do, so, what I do now and what a lot of people, especially in this space, have come to know me for is completely different from what I started my career out to be. I always knew I wanted to be in design and in architecture. And that's something that I knew, finishing my, as I was finishing my IDF service, I knew that that was something that I wanted to do. After I finished my service, I worked, I saved up a little bit of money, and I went to New York, where I registered for design school. I was registered at the Art Institute, and I started to study there. I completed my degree over many years as I went back and forth between New York and Israel, and then finally ended up in Toronto at the Art Institutes here to complete my degree. And in 2010, I actually was, I guess you could say the word is discovered by one of my very good friends who, is or was at that time working in the senior production space of television here in Canada. And he offered me an audition to try out for Canada's longest running and highest rated lifestyle brand show, which is CityLine. And the rest kind of became history. So I started with that, and I got to kind of do this new thing that I never thought I would actually get into, which was television. But what that actually then gave me, this newfound kind of platform that I have, gave me this opportunity to use, this kind of public profile to really educate about Israel, about the Holocaust, about Judaism, about Jews, in a way that I never could really affect before because I had this large platform. So, it's been such a blessing. It was nothing that I had ever planned, and I'm so glad that it happened anyway, because it truly has been a blessing for me.
Amazing. Well, thank you both, and we're so excited to get to chat with you over the next little bit. So we are in the middle of Hanukkah right now. It is obviously a strange Hanukkah. What is something that is bringing you light this year?
I thought about this a lot. I remember we were all panicking about Passover. What were we going to do? Like, if I didn't have my Bubby's chopped liver, what was going to happen? But, what ended up happening was that there were like millions more people were just hosting a Seder, right? Because you couldn't go anywhere. So, I, for the first time, hosted a Seder. It was me, my husband, and my cat, the aforementioned Cat Stevens, who's glaring at me just off screen. And these are his treats that I bribe him away from me with. He was actually sleeping all morning. And then when I logged onto the Zoom, he just popped up and he was like, there's a camera? There's a camera, I should put my butt in front of it.
That's right.
Yeah. So, something that gave me so much hope and inspiration was, think about how many Passover Seders there were this year. People who had never hosted them before. People would just go to their aunts or uncles or just sort of like outsource that work in a lot of ways. And they had to sort of figure out like, what am I going to do for myself? And I imagine that that's going to carry out to next year too. And so for Hanukkah, I lit the menorah here by ourselves all however many nights it's been. I can't even keep track at this point. But I think that there's something about the agency with which people are able to take control of their Judaism, because they can't do anything else. Right now we're pretty locked down here in New York. So yes, maybe you could go do an outdoor candle lighting somewhere, but I think that people, had to figure out what's their menorah, what kind of menorah do they want in their house? Like all these things that means you're gonna have a menorah next year and you can light the candles next year. And I think that there's so much opportunity for this like DIY sort of Judaism that is really important, particularly to young people who wouldn't necessarily do this on their own.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think that, the resolve that I'm seeing in our community to kind of do the things that they need to do is inspirational. It's aspirational, it's inspirational. I absolutely love seeing, that we've, taken this situation that we find ourselves in and have really come out on the other side in terms of everything that we have to do as a community, whether it's through our holidays or through the other things that we are doing in our communities, in a way that, something is not what the usual or the regular, but we are doing it in a way that almost inspires me and gets me excited to see on the other side, what amazing things we can continue to do when we don't have the constrictions or the restrictions that we have now. So I'm just really proud of everybody and the resolve that we have and to do the things that we need to do and try to keep some sort of normalcy.
Amazing. And love the Hanukkah right in front of you there, Shai. So Stephanie, I know that you have a question that you like to start off with when you're interviewing other 3Gs or grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. So we thought we would flip it and ask it to the both of you. So when did you realize that your family or your grandparents were different from other people's families?
That's so funny. I never thought anyone would ask me that question. I always just lob it to people first, and everyone's like, there was this one moment where I saw, or people say, I never really, I always knew. I always knew. And so, my answer is, that's really funny. I should have had an answer for this. I think I always knew that my family was a little bit different. And the way it sort of manifested itself was, well, so my grandparents died when I was very young. So I didn't really know them. I was 3 and 4 when they passed away, my father's parents. My mother's parents are luckily still with us, and maybe even on the Zoom. They do love to watch me on Zoom. But, we did the sort of like American conservative Judaism. We went to holidays went to synagogue on the few holidays when everyone went. But what we did much more was, was work with the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is a living memorial to the Holocaust is its full name. We were really involved with this Holocaust museum. And I think I would go there more often than I would go to synagogue. And so to me, there was this idea that like this Holocaust piece of our memory, and probably more so because my grandparents did die pretty early on. So, that was about actually honoring their memory. That became my expression of Judaism in a way. It wasn't about going to synagogue. It weirdly was about, this Holocaust legacy that we all were, we blessed and obligated with in a lot of ways. But when I think about like a moment, I was in college and I was home from college, and I had a friend who is not Jewish who stayed with me for the night. And my great aunt was at our house. She was the last living survivor. She passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. She and my dad, she'd come to our house because my dad they were going to go to the cemetery to visit a gravestone, which was like also a normal thing in my house. I feel like everyone was just going to the cemetery like on a random Sunday. And she had the Auschwitz numbers on her arm, which was something that was always very normal to me. You see those sort of like liver spotted arms with faded numbers. That was something I grew up with. And I saw as an adult or a 19-year-old, my friend react to those numbers and like was horrified and was so freaked out. I mean, she was sort of like moved and freaked out and didn't even know what to do. And I sort of said, oh, it is not, it's not necessarily typical to see that and to be so sort of immune to what that means because you've just grown up with that. So that to me was like a real moment that sticks out as like, oh, not everyone has this experience. What about you, Shai?
It's interesting. So, I grew up in a very, Jewish environment. Whether I was here, whether I was, back home in Israel, it was always very, very Jewish and very Jewish centric. I think the difference for me was in my own personal family, my grandfather was the only one in my family, whether it was my extended family or, my immediate family, that was a Holocaust survivor. And within our own family, as I started to grow, I could see the differences in him as opposed to, other people in my family. And that got me to asking a lot of questions because when we were younger, it was very clear, his history and his story, but it was very difficult for him to talk about. And we got to a point where I believe I was in 7th grade and I sat down with him and I revisited and we went through and recreated his memoir. And it was cathartic for him. It was eye-opening for me, but it really got me to understanding, what the difference is in families who were immediately affected by it, as opposed to, maybe families that didn't have that immediate connection, although of course all the Jewish people are affected by it. And of course, people who, are not Jewish and perhaps didn't have that familial connection to it. I can remember things that my grandfather would do that would seem so mundane and so ordinary to me, but if I had friends over or even other family members over and would see him act or react in certain ways, it would be so shocking to them. And it was, something that was it was for him, it was traumatic, it was post, PTSD. It can be defined as so many things, but it was always so normal to me. It never really kind of like jumped out at me where other people were like, why is your grandfather reacting like that? Why does he sound like that? Why does he say those things? And all of a sudden, for me, I was like, I need to not only explain to other people who may not be Jewish, but I realize that there are a lot of people who, if they don't see that growing up, then they just don't understand what it means to kind of witness and then also be affected by what is now intergenerational trauma.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this question is kind of related to that, and maybe Shai, if you want to take it first, because it kind of jumps off of what you were talking about. But is there a certain, moment or collection of moments that urged you to find your voice and use it in the way that you do now?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I think that, I've those people who know me, I've never been a wallflower. I've always been very loud and very kind of, in your face, and I'll say what I want to say. But I think for me, in terms of what I understood all of a sudden when I had or began to have this public platform, I realized that I had this responsibility to educate in a way that perhaps I didn't have a platform for before. And I think my jumping off point as to why I was starting to do the things that I was doing is, way back in 2013, way back in 2013, I had the amazing opportunity to visit, take an entire camera crew with my show back to Israel and bring back to North Americans Israel through the eyes of just, a citizen, not through CNN and not through any of the other things. And when I saw how much that changed perception and how much people learned and how I was able to reach people that, were in markets or places across the country, whether in Canada or the US, that I was unable to reach beforehand, there was a click in my mind. And I realized that this, this, for me, what was then at that point, this new kind of found celebrity, if you will, was fun and exciting. But then I understood that I had a responsibility as well. And that is when I decided that, I'm going to use this platform that I have to educate, to talk about the things that maybe people don't want to talk about. And that really brings us up into today with regards to Holocaust, information, education, Judaism in general, and the things that we face today and kind of this new anti-Semitism that we're facing today. So that would have been my jumping off point.
Yeah, Stephanie, what about you?
It's funny. I don't see what I do as advocacy work in any way. I mean, I'm a journalist. I tell stories. I bring information to people. But, the stories that I'm really intrigued by are stories, are so often these kinds of stories. And yes, of course, the stories of survivors, but the stories of, again, like this intergenerational trauma, this, this idea of epigenetic. I mean, these are really fascinating things to me. And especially people, who, I had David from 3GNY as one of my interviewees. And, it was really interesting. You can sort of say, what's the weird thing that your family does with food? And you immediately get an answer from someone, right? Like there's so many fascinating things and you just have to ask these questions. And so, I found that when I sort of like came out as a 3G, it was something that I talk about a lot on the podcast, but, with this event series that I started doing, I sort of started hearing from people and people who were sort of saying like, I guess I always knew that about you, but it's been really interesting. Like that sort of people seem really, really interested in the ability to explore those stories. So something I'm working right now because I work in podcasts at a magazine is basically like a 3G centric podcast to sort of share those experiences. I'm still working it out. I'm still sort of brainstorming it, but to me, it's just these are a lot of the stories of the Jewish people. And so as a journalist for a Jewish outlet, I mean, I am privileged to be able to sort of focus on these stories, which I feel really grateful for.
Thank you. And so you said that you don't really consider what you do to be advocacy, but which is a very, legitimate thing to say. But whether you see it as advocacy or not, how do your peers, whether Jewish or not, react to your, we'll put advocacy in quotes, advocacy work and the things that you choose to focus on and the stories that you choose to tell? How do your peers react to that? And maybe how did they react to it when you started doing this?
It's really funny. In college, I lived in a dorm with a bunch of friends in a block, it was called. And this girl who was very, very waspy lived next door. And she, I guess, was in a history class and maybe was like learning about the Holocaust potentially for the first time. And so she came into my room one day holding this book. I forgot what book whatever textbook was. And she said, "Did you guys know what happened like during the Holocaust?" And she'd like flip open to the picture of the bodies, all the people in in the barracks. And I was just like, yes, like it was just this weird jarring moment where I realized, oh, actually not everyone this wasn't sort of an inherent part of everyone's education and understanding. So for me, yes, that was definitely a moment where I said, oh, like this was a very smart woman. Like the fact that she just was so shocked by it made me realize that, oh, there actually is sort of work to be done. For my I think everyone's really interested. I mean, the thing that, last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, I don't, again, the Museum of Jewish Heritage honored my family as part of their Generation to Generation event. And instead of like a stuffy dinner, it was a big fun virtual event. And, we shared photos of my grandparents and I like put them up on Instagram, and people really responded because they said, people really connect with personal stories, right? So when I was actually able to share a photo from my dad's bar mitzvah, people were writing in saying, oh my God, your grandma, her hairdo, like that makes it really real for people. This was a real person who has a story and who I'm trying to honor in the work that I do. So people love vintage Instagrams, I think is my takeaway.
And that was a great event. It was a really beautiful, well done event as well.
Thank you.
Shai, what about you?
For me, it's been really mixed. I mean, I think that being in media, and then of course, Stephanie, you work within media, and you have the beautiful privilege of being able to work for a Jewish publication. I just work in regular media, and media tends to be, a very kind of like liberal space, which is amazing. And, we can really kind of be free about what it is that we want to say. And I say that it's amazing, but then on the flip side, there's always like that those things that irk you about being able to just say whatever you want to say, because as much as I educate about, the different things I educate, whether it's Holocaust, whatever it is, the general consensus has always been, thank you so much. We didn't know. That's something we had no idea about. This is something that's new for me, and very similar to what, Stephanie is saying. It never ceases to amaze me how many people don't know things about the Holocaust when I say something, whatever it is. And I'm like, what, really? And I look at them as if, well, isn't that just general knowledge? And it's not. And that's why what we do is so very important. That general knowledge is just not out there. As Holocaust survivors are starting to, pass on these stories, their lives, the history is so much more important in terms of being able to, or the need to talk about it is so much more important, so that it doesn't die with them. I remember it was last year, I think it was a Washington Post article that talked about something like 65% of millennials didn't know what Auschwitz was. And I took that article, and I remember I went to our breakfast, there's 2 television shows that I work on here. One is CityLine, one is Breakfast Television. The Breakfast Television was more the news show. I took that article on and we spoke about, anti-Semitism, but I can't tell you how shocked the people who are, my age or maybe, a generation younger, still really don't know so much about the Holocaust, one of the most horrific times in human history. And there's still so much that needs to be taught. So the praise that I get on one side, but the kind of the surprise, I think, that I get from a lot of, obviously, mostly, the non-Jewish community is still just as shocking to me as it was the first day, but it's also what fuels me, because it makes me understand that there's so much more work to be done.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we talked a little bit about Hanukkah. We're in the middle. I think yesterday was the 4th night, so that makes today the 4th day. Yeah, tonight will be the 5th candle. So the Jewish festival of Hanukkah celebrates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The Jews rising up during the 2nd century of BC, after the ancient Greeks had banned Jewish religious practice. And we know so many stories of Jews that risked their lives during the Holocaust to find ways to celebrate Hanukkah, as well as other holidays and celebrations, in defiance of the Nazis in ghettos and in camps. As grandchildren of survivors, do you think about this when we light our candles openly and freely, continuing the traditions of our ancestors? Specifically our grandparents, and what meaning does that hold in your heart, specifically in relation?
This is reminding me, we had sort of this like mezuzah gate on the podcast last year. I mentioned that, I live in New York City. I lived in at that point I lived in a very small walk up. And I casually mentioned that I didn't have a mezuzah on my door. for a lot of reasons. Mostly I'm lazy. I didn't think, it didn't really occur to me. I don't like my neighbors to know anything about, like, one time my neighbor heard me on like a NPR affiliate and stopped me in the hallway and said, I heard you on the radio. And I was like, I have to move. That is like, you can't know anything about me. I need like anonymity in this building. And so people wrote in and got really mad. And this was just a casual thing I mentioned. They said, how dare you not have a mezuzah? You live in New York. There are people all over the world who don't live somewhere where they can have a menorah. I mean, by the way, if you host a Jewish podcast, like, Shai, you're lucky you're in mainstream TV. If you host a Jewish podcast, you get a lot of feedback from our very engaged listener base. I love them, but it was very visceral. So, they were saying, how dare you not have a mezuzah? You can have one. You are able to have one. And so, the story ended up, it's a few episodes, but we did a special episode where I ended up moving and there was a mezuzah on the door of my new apartment. And it was a hideous mezuzah. Shai, you would have hated it. It was horrible. And I said, wait, after all of this, drama, I am not ending up with someone else's mezuzah on my door. And so first of all, over the course of like the 6 months, a lot of people had sent me mezuzot, friends, a sorority sister of mine who was not Jewish, but was dating someone Jewish, went to Israel and sent me a mezuzah. And, I ended up doing a whole episode where I put up a mezuzah on my door. And I actually one that was so pretty, I put it inside my apartment too. So I have two now. And for me, that was actually sort of along, I don't think about this question in a way, and I in a year where we're all sort of reckoning with our privilege. I mean, it's true. I don't really think when I light the Hanukkah candles. I mean, if I remember to do it, it's sort of it has become disconnected to me from this idea. But you see that picture that surfaces around the internet every year around this time of the menorah being lit and then sort of the swastika Nazi flag outside the window. So a menorah being lit in, I guess it was Nazi Germany or Nazi occupied wherever in Europe. And that you see that picture and it's chilling and you realize, oh, this is what it meant. And so, I think for a lot of us, Hanukkah has been removed from a lot of the real meaning behind it. I think a lot of people wouldn't know, you give a great explanation of the holiday, Jaime. I think a lot of Jews might not know that or remember it. So, I do think a lot about the way my actions serve this larger cause. So it's definitely something I'm working through.
It's interesting because you spoke about the mezuzah, and that actually just brought up a story in my mind. So where I live now, I live in downtown Toronto, which is a very multicultural, multifaceted, kind of like everybody is everybody. Toronto is this great multicultural city, but downtown Toronto doesn't have. I mean, it has a younger generation in terms of a Jewish population. Most of the Jewish community lives in specific areas in Toronto, and downtown Toronto isn't a huge one. I moved into my new condo here, and of course, everywhere where I've ever lived, I've always had a mezuzah, and it's always been a specific mezuzah that my grandmother gave to me. It was this beautiful lace mezuzah from Tel Aviv in this market that she bought, and it was just beautiful, and it was something that I took with me everywhere. And never had an issue with it. And, I'm one of those people who, I don't know if, I'm one of those people who I move into a new building. I'm the first one going through all the names on the thing to see if I can find Jewish names on the thing, which is funny because I have the most non-Jewish name, but I'm that person. I just want to kind of like know who my community is in the building. And we put up the mezuzah on our door. And about a week later, I came home and it was gone. And I was devastated, absolutely devastated, because it was such, I mean, besides the point that it was my mezuzah taken off the door, it was something that my grandmother gave me. And I was just devastated. This entire building came together, and it was a brand new build. So, there weren't tons of people here, but the builder, and they just came together, and they came and they presented my partner and I with this new mezuzah one day, so apologetic and so sorry about what had happened. And I got to realizing that fear, because it was this certain fear that I had when I came home and I saw that mezuzah was off the door. When I lived in Israel, I never had to worry about stuff like that. When I lived in the northern part of Toronto, which is like the very Jewish and Israeli part of Toronto, I never had to worry about that. It was the first time I genuinely had this fear in my heart of, oh my God, is someone like attacking me or coming at me because I am Jewish, and they are willing to actually deface my property? And it woke me up in a way that you asked the question about, do I think about this when I light the Chanukiah or when I, do whatever it is that I do? And I light Shabbat can. I'm not a religious person by any means. I'm a spiritual person, but there are certain things that I do in honor and in recognition of, my history and my people and my past. I light Shabbat candles Do I keep Shabbat? No. I light Shabbat candles. I like the Chanukiah. I do those kind of things that, connect me in the way that I feel that I need to be connected. But after that story, after that happened, it almost took on a new meaning for me. And I will never obviously understand, what our ancestors went through and the way that they went through it. But that short, brief period of time when I had that fear, when that fear was like, I'm being now targeted because I'm a Jew and someone is coming and defacing my property, it makes me think when I like the Chanukiah, what our, my grandfather, what, our families had to go through in order to be able to keep who they were. And in a time which is not just somebody ripping it off their door, obviously it was a different time. So it's definitely something that I think about.
It's funny, Shai, if I really interrogate, some part of me, which is probably because of where, from where I come was like, I don't necessarily, it's putting a mezuzah on your door. It's a big statement. And I think I may have been a little scared to say that, right? To say like, I am a Jewish person, here's my door. And I think some part of me does want to fly under the radar. There's a sense of, I don't want to say intergenerational trauma, but like this idea of like, don't draw attention to yourself. Now, of course, I have 17 million mezuzot, and you're right. Like you sort of do need to confront what it means to be proudly Jewish. And, it's something that I think about a lot because, a lot of people who listen to our podcast are people who don't do anything else Jewish, who don't even know where to find a synagogue, wouldn't feel comfortable in a synagogue, can afford synagogue dues. There are a lot of people who just want Jewish engagement. And so I've been thinking a lot about, how to allow people to feel pride over their Jewish, even if they don't want a mezuzah, like this idea of saying like, you don't have to do these things. Like I didn't put a mezuzah up because people yelled at me, put a mezuzah up, well, to replace an ugly one, but because I actually did want to, like I came around to this idea of like, oh, this is an important thing to mark this as a Jewish home.
It's interesting you say that because I think one of the things that I'm noticing so much, especially when it comes to, I have a great following from the US as well as I do here in Canada, but that little border, and you think North America is North America, but that little border really defines so much difference in terms of the Jewish community in so many different ways. But I really feel that, I look at what's happening in the US now, especially after the horrible year we've had and the horrible last 4 years you guys have had. It's been really difficult for so many marginalized communities. But when I look at the Jewish community specifically, and I see this a lot within the US, within the US Jewish community, is you're right. I see this fear sometimes. People will private message me and they'll say to me, how do you have the courage to do the things that you do, especially in the public platform that you do? And with my platform comes a little bit of security because, I feel like, I'm in a public space. I'm a little bit more safe because people who tend to be extremely racist or extremely anti-Semitic try to do it behind the scenes. So for me, it'll be a lot of attacks from like, fake accounts and stuff like that. But what I'm noticing in kind of the Jewish space in the US is that it's a lot more overt. I mean, you're talking to us from New York. It's New York. I mean, could there be any more Jewish than New York in the US?
I have a bagel waiting for me right when I finish this.
Oh, thank you. Okay. And yeah, right. Okay.
Part of my contract.
Good for you. But it's shocking to me to hear, I won't even say shocking because I shouldn't say that. It's heartbreaking for me to hear you say that you still have that fear as you're hearing me talk about it, because it's something I think that most Jews don't even think about. It took me standing in front of my door and going through the whole, well, who came in here? How did someone get past the concierge? How, all these things. Is it someone in my building? So it's all of a sudden this fear came over me that I had never experienced before. So it makes me happy to hear that you were able to, at least when it comes to that, get over it and put up what you wanted to put up, whether it was to get rid of the ugly one or just because you wanted one. But it's so wonderful to hear that even now, 3 generations later, some of us are still getting over these humps. That has so much to do with this institutionalized trauma that we would have never had it not been for so much of our history, the Holocaust in particular.
Well, thank you for sharing those stories and those personal reflections. I'm going to ask. I have one more question before we move to some questions that have been coming in from the audience. But I feel like it wouldn't be a Zoom call, if I didn't specifically ask about about COVID, and I like to look at the silver linings, or someone referred to them to me recently as platinum linings, because platinum is better than silver. But how has COVID changed or impacted the way that you do what you do in both positive and a negative or a negative way? I mean, Stephanie, I feel like you're so ahead of the curve in podcasting. Everyone's turning to podcasting and things now. You're already there, but how has this changed the things that you do?
It's interesting. So I work for an online magazine and I do podcasts for them. So I was very well situated. I converted a coat closet in my apartment. Not to brag, but I live in New York City and I do have a coat closet, which is the first thing. So I made a studio. So I have a recording studio in my apartment. It is insane. There's like coats on the side. I've decorated the back, I'm there. I'm in the corner of my bedroom right now. I wallpapered this. I feel like Shai, like maybe some props.
I'm like loving that over there, just by the way.
And so, my day-to-day job has remained largely the same. Obviously I'm not going to complain because obviously, we're healthy and everything. So feeling very grateful for that. But, serving our community of Jewish readers and listeners, that has changed very much. We did this passive, what were we calling it? Seder Academy. We launched these Zooms right away to help people, how do you run a Zoom Seder? Because that's what people needed to know. So I'm trying to equip people with what they need to engage Jewishly. The thing that I've been really interested in is the number of people who log in each week for my in-laws' synagogue's daily minyan has quadrupled from literally 10 to at least 60 people each week. And so that, to me, I've been really trying to think about the ways in which the pandemic has actually eased restrictions and accessibility for a lot of people. The disabled community who was not always necessarily able to make it to services, now all of a sudden services are online. So we've removed a lot of boundaries. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm not one of those people who is hand wringing over Zoom services. I'm not particularly religious, so I'm okay with doing services on holidays. I've actually been live streaming Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur for years, and I talk about it with no shame on the podcast. It used to be sort of shameful, oh, you don't go to synagogue? And I said, no, I don't pay synagogue dues. I love to go to synagogues all around the city, and I have my 3 that I toggle between for each service, and then I donate to each of them, and that's sort of my dues. So I guess I'm sort of optimistic. I know that's not really the question, but I'm optimistic about what this means for Jewish life. The reality of my life is my cat has been torturing me for this entire Zoom and for the last 9 months because I'm in his space, and he's not, I'm not supposed to be here. So COVID has affected my life broadly, but we've been able to adapt.
Well, and Shai has a dog, and I feel like the dogs are happy that the humans are in their space, as opposed to the cats are unhappy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. She's here. It's going to be really hard going back to regular work after all this is over. I feel like she's going to have to start coming with me places because she's just become so attached to the fact that we're home all day, every day. So it'll be interesting to see.
Any thoughts, Shai, about how COVID has changed?
It's changed my life. In terms of work. So I look at 2 aspects of my life. I'll look at, my regular kind of design business. And in terms of that, things have pretty much stayed the same. What we're noticing is that a lot of people, of course, are home now. So they notice their challenges in their spaces. So, it's kind of, been an eye opener in that sense. In terms of what I do for, and again, we'll use that broad term, advocacy. Working in the television space that I do, we are actually filming our programs now the same way that I'm talking to you guys. I actually film them from home, and we have a feed into our studios. So, we are not, we're not by any means not affected by it. So I've really become kind of used to this kind of digital space now. And I think what makes me kind of excited I've started to use all these platforms, whether it be Instagram. Over the summer, I did this Instagram series where every week I kind of interviewed, somebody who had some sort of connection to the Jewish community or something that was a little bit, kind of out there in terms of it's not something that you would expect when you talk about the Jewish community, to be able to bridge gaps between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community and kind of allies in whether we're fighting anti-Semitism or whatever it is that we're fighting. And it really opened up a world to me that I don't want to say I thank COVID for, but it's almost like the silver lining that came out of it in terms of being able to create this amazing content with all these people that would have perhaps never otherwise had a voice in a public platform that, you know, I was able to kind of offer them. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I really hope that this kind of need or want to connect with other people from within our community, from outside of the community, to kind of create these new conversations and to give platforms to speak out. I hope it continues after. I mean, I can't see it won't. We've created this momentum, and I'm really excited to see it continue.
Fantastic. So I'm going to turn to a couple of questions that we've gotten from the fantastic people who have joined us to listen to this conversation. The first question is a little bit of the flip of what Shai was saying. You know, you were saying you're so optimistic. This question's a little less optimistic. Sorry. But the question is, have you been met with anti-Semitic or anti-Israel rhetoric in reaction to what you do? How do you respond? And I know you talked a little bit about this before in relation to the mezuzah, but what advice do you have to other 3Gs on how to respond to these incidents?
You know, it's interesting because people who live here in Toronto and actually across, it's really kind of went across the world. I had the unfortunate, I guess, experience of here in Toronto specifically being the center of an attack by a business here in Toronto, which has really made worldwide headlines, attacking me because I am Israeli. But really the underlying, you know, if you kind of follow this business and follow their feeds and whatnot, it was anti-Semitism. And here in Canada, we are very fortunate to have laws that protect, you know, people against hate crimes. Unlike in the US, where everything is freedom of speech, here in Canada, we're a little bit more guarded. And unfortunately, I became kind of the center of this attack because I had used my TV platform to kind of speak out against anti-Semitism. And for those who don't know about what happened, you know, my picture was taken and put onto this person's business account. No, I had never been to that business before. I had no idea who they were. And simply because I am Israeli, they took my picture, put it up, and said that I am a terrorist and that I sniper Palestinian children. And of course, my own heart broke and shattered at that exact moment, because say whatever you want about me, the one thing that people know about me is that I will, you know, climb mountains for children specifically, and kind of, you know, those more marginalized groups. And to hear that really upset me, and it became kind of this big thing now that, you know, a lot of the Toronto Jewish community is, you know, following and supporting, and I'm very grateful for. But what it taught me was, for a very short, brief moment, I became recluse. I became almost scared. I was like, oh no. I was like, you know, this isn't where I wanted this to go. You know, why is it that this good stuff that I'm doing is now trying to be skewed or taken out or changed into something that it's not? And, you know, I quickly understood it was because it was just an anti-Semitic base. But what it did was, for that very short moment, it jarred me. But that jarring became my power. And when I realized that, you know, I'm in a position to take, again, this attack and not be quiet about it, and not, you know, try to be like, you know, let's just move on and hopefully we forget about it. No, I centered it in every conversation that I had at that time. We spoke about it, we dissected it. You know, it has been in the news from coast to coast to coast here. I received more interviews after this personal, you know, kind of attack on me globally than I have in probably my 10-year TV career, from people just calling me from markets. We had heard it was in a paper here, and it shocked me to the core how people were so, the Jewish community specifically, was so grateful for the fact that I didn't shy away from it, and that I was fighting it, and that I didn't, you know, I wanted to make sure that this just wasn't going to be swept under the rug. This was going to, you know, affect change. Whatever that change was going to be, I was going to make sure that I was going to affect change in terms of creating a conversation, making sure that conversation continues, and, you know, not being afraid to talk about the difficult things. Don't be afraid of the vitriol that's out there. I mean, think about it this way. We're talking about 3Gs. We're talking about, you know, we're third-generation Holocaust survivors. The vitriol that we're facing in no way at all compares to what our ancestors went through. So as hard as it is for us, because this is our new reality, I remind myself day in, day out, this is just another part of their fight. And if they could do what they did, I certainly can do the little part that I want to do.
That's amazing. I do just want to say, I want to take this to a completely different place. Someone did just message me about the fact that I have a yellow star on my sweater, and I do want to acknowledge that it makes me a little uncomfortable. I put on this sweater this morning and I was like, oh, a formal Zoom sweater. And I noticed that there was just there's one yellow star on it. It's right here. I don't know how I bought this without noticing, because I feel like as a 3G, I'm like, striped pajamas, knows, like H&M, no, you can't sell those. Like Zara, like you pick up all this stuff. So anyway, but I kind of like it. I think it's like, maybe I can, I don't know. It's a little weird.
You look great. I love it.
But like, this is the same thing, right? I'm like, wait, I'm wearing a yellow, like we think about these things all the time, right? Like, I think if you could see the whole sweater also, it would take like, it wouldn't be as intense, but yeah, I agree. So there's this sense, I think, that a lot of us deal with. I mean, look, I'm pretty cloistered. I work in a Jewish publication. It takes a lot to sort of like get there. I mean, we used to get like nasty, when I was sort of like at our reception desk, I would get, the nasty phone calls, but that was very impersonal. We would get mailers that were like mimeographed, like this is Bloomberg and this guy and all these like Jewish bankers, and someone's drawing on it, and you're like, okay, that's freaky, but it's not what happened to you, right? Which is personal and foundational in so many ways. It's your identity. So, I feel fortunate. I'm like so Jewish in such a Jewish space that like, what are you gonna, like, what? It's so hard, but I think the interesting thing of what you're saying is the Israel thing, right? Like that is this weird radioactive thing that I can't really explain. And I do think a lot of it, I don't need to get into the whole anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism debate, but there's a way in which I think Israeli Jews, especially public ones, are like, there is a mark on you in some way, because it would be bad. Like if someone came after me, it would be anti-Semitic, right? Like it would be clear that you hated Jews. But if someone comes after you, they can spin it in a way that it's more somehow socially, I mean, it's not socially, it's not acceptable, but in some ways it's perceived as being more acceptable. And so I think this anti-Zionism thing is a bigger issue than necessarily like anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is not that overt, I'd say still. I mean, in my experience, fortunately. But yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that my challenge with the whole, and again, I don't want to get into this anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism debate, but I think that I like to call it, okay, fine, let's do it.
Just kidding.
Let's just do it. I think I call it the new anti-Semitism. I mean, that's exactly what it is, but it is a mask. And I continually say this to, different groups or different interviews or whatever it is that I do, is that it masks itself as something good, as something progressive. I mean, we know that we understand what the root is, but it's almost like, I can't overtly be anti-Semitic. I can't say, horrible things, use racial slurs to you when it comes to Jews. But if I say it about Israelis, then, I can say it's a political thing. I can say which in and of itself, and, then I will get people who will say to me, well, if I can't say Israel has no right to exist, or if I shouldn't say Israel has no right to exist, I can't say that about Saudi Arabia as well, because that's Islamophobic. And right away, I'll look at people and I'll be like, you're talking about 22 countries versus one. I was like, if it's the one that's bothering you, it might be an issue that has a base in anti-Semitism. And I think that it's a struggle for me to see so many from within our own and younger. It's not 3Gs, it's like 4Gs, or 5Gs, I guess, whatever. No, I guess it would be 4Gs, kind of in this space of, and it's part of their own intergenerational trauma, not knowing how to be part of the American fabric or the Canadian fabric, proudly be Jewish, say that, yes, it's okay. I too am allowed to have a homeland just like everybody else is allowed, and not be embarrassed about that and feel as though you still have a space in progressive spaces. And I am like the poster child for progression. I am LGBT, I am Sephardi, I'm a Jew, I'm all these things. And yet, the simple fact of, because my nationality, because I am proud of who I am, because I serve my country, all of a sudden I'm a bad person. And it's specific to Jewish people, the Jewish country. So of course, we can't say anti-Zionism is an anti-Semitism. And with that, I'm not going to say any more about that space, because this is not what we're talking about. But I'll throw it back at you, and I appreciate you saying it, because it's just something that I feel like a lot of people want to tiptoe around. And if we tiptoe around it and don't, deal with it straight on, it's going to be an issue for a lot longer than it needs to be.
Well, thank you for that. And Stephanie, was there anything else you wanted to say on that?
No, I think what's happening in like I'm a proud progressive. I think it's becoming a little bit untenable for Jews in those spaces. I think they feel uncomfortable. And something that I was noticing, I don't remember when, but there was a bunch of people who emailed me and said, can you explain BDS to me? Like people who just didn't know. They sort of said, everyone's talking about it right now. I have no idea. Like, what is it? Can you explain? Someone saying like,
yeah.
And I think that's the thing that a lot of Jews are realizing right now, young Jews in particular, like you sort of need to educate yourself because there are so many people having these conversations that have all of these facts and this study and this. And what most Jews have is just like, I love being Jewish. I love bagels. I love, and Sephardi foods. I love, lighting the Hanukkah. I love this and this and this. I'm actually not prepared to have a conversation about like geopolitics.
Right.
And I went on Birthright and loved it, but I'm not really able to, so I think that we're finding that people are now trying to educate themselves because these are conversations that are going on. So right. I guess that's good. I mean, I don't know. I feel like when I was in college, I didn't have to think about Israel or Palestine. Like I didn't have to think about this stuff, but now you kind of have to today. So I think maybe the platinum lining or the whatever's less than silver, is that we're arming, we have a lot of more educated young people who, because they have to, it sucks, but they have to engage in these conversations.
Well, thank you for, sorry, no, go ahead, Shai.
So I was just going to jump in and say one more quick thing. And I think that it really speaks to what Stephanie was saying right now. I've had the amazing honor in the past 4 years to travel across the world and speak at universities and different kind of Jewish groups on university campuses. And I will say this, what you guys are doing now here at Liberation, 75, what you do, Stephanie, at Tablet, all these kind of great Jewish organizations and what people are doing now is the only thing that so many of these kids are saying that kind of like gives them the hope that they don't have to fear wearing a kippah as they walk onto campus or wearing their Magen David as they walk into a classroom. And I'm so there with you, Stephanie, in terms of any type of education is good. And even if it is, Jews who are saying, up until now, eating my bagel and Lutz was my, kind of like my Jewish pride. Now we're learning a lot more about it. Yes, there are going to be those difficult questions we have to answer. But I just think that, without organizations like you guys, I can't even imagine being able to stand on a stage and talk about the things that I do because you guys really are the institution. And I'm so appreciative for that.
Well, that's a great way to kind of bring it back around and to end this on a little bit of a more positive, optimistic, forward-thinking note. And so this has been great. Thank you both for having this conversation with me. And I'm going to, I think, throw it back over to Rafi Yablonski, who's going to wrap things up for us.
Well, thank you again to my friend Jaime for coming up with the idea for today's program and approaching Raquel and I. I hope that inspires any 3G watching out there just to contact Liberation 75 or 3G New York with your idea. We'd love to make it happen. And of course, to stay in touch and to get the latest updates on our upcoming events, check out liberation75.org or 3GNewYorkNY.org and sign up for their newsletter. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again to our fabulous speakers, Stephanie and Shai. Just one last round of applause for them. Make sure to subscribe to Stephanie's weekly podcast, Unorthodox. Catch Shai on Canada's #1 morning show, City TV, CityLine, and make sure to follow them both on Instagram. Chag Hanukkah Sameach, happy holidays. Here's to a better and brighter 2021. Keep safe, healthy, and happy. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, guys.
So much.